Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, we can all finally breathe easy. President Biden at long last picking up the phone and calling Prime Minister Netanyahu. Meanwhile, Netanyahu using his personal connections to Russian President Vladimir Putin in brokering a prisoner swap agreement with Syria. And finally, snowfall in Jerusalem. Israel ending a week of winter storms with a beautiful but equally disruptive blanket of white. Following nearly a month of silence and speculations, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and United States President Joe Biden finally speaking on Wednesday. Biden calling Netanyahu for the first time since taking office as president in January. But while Netanyahu is the first Middle Eastern leader to receive a call from the White House, he was the 12th world leader overall. And the 4 weeks of silence leading many to wonder whether Washington was snubbing its longtime ally. So in any case, hopefully all these speculations can now be put to rest, especially as the Prime Minister's office is reporting the roughly hour-long conversation as very friendly and warm, covering a range of major topics from boosting ties to the Iran nuclear threat and the fight against coronavirus. Biden, for his part, also congratulating Netanyahu for his leadership in dealing with the pandemic. Now, speaking of Iran, United States and European leaders holding talks on Thursday in the latest efforts to revitalize the JCPOA nuclear agreement. Top diplomats from around the world collecting in Paris, both virtually and in person, to brainstorm one last-ditch effort that might bring Iran back into compliance with the 2015 JCPOA nuclear agreement. The officials from France, Germany, the UK, and the United States looking to have Tehran reverse and refrain from any steps that would impact its assurances to the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA.
Of course, we are aware of Iran's threat to cease the provisional application of its additional protocol obligations, as well as other inspections provided for under the 2015 deal, the JCPOA. This, of course, comes on top of other steps Iran has taken that go beyond what the JCPOA allows in terms of limits on its nuclear programs. The good news, of course, is that all of these steps are reversible, and the path for diplomacy remains open. And I would say that as we and our partners have underscored, Iran should reverse these steps and refrain from taking others that would impact the IAEA assurances on which not only the United States, not only our allies and partners in the region, but the entire world relies.
The Biden administration long been stating that it intends to return to the JCPOA and lift sanctions imposed on Iran as soon as Iran returns to compliance with the deal first. But Iran is still sticking to its guns too. Ayatollah Khamenei pressing Washington to lift sanctions reimposed by President Trump before Iran changes its course. And the deadline set by Tehran now just days away, after which Iran will begin limiting access for nuclear inspections.
بگم ما حرف و وعده خوب خیلی شنیدیم که در عمل اون حرفها و وعده‌ها نقض شده و ضدش عمل شده. حرف فایده نداره، وعده فایده نداره. این دفعه فقط عمل از طرف مقابل ببینیم ما هم عمل خواهیم کرد.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu flexing his political muscles on Wednesday, revealing that a complicated prisoner swap agreement has been reached with Syria, and that Netanyahu's, quote, personal connections with Russia played a part. Hannah Rifkin reporting.
Secretive negotiations earlier this week, not so secret anymore. Israel and Syria agreeing to a prisoner exchange involving a young Israeli woman and 2 imprisoned Syrian residents of the Golan Heights. And the deal, brokered through Russia in a meeting lasting less than an hour, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu telling Army radio that he's using his personal connections with President Putin to secure the Israelis' release. Meanwhile, National Security Advisor Meir Ben-Shabbat and hostage coordinator Yaron Blum leaving for Moscow on Wednesday as well. As for the prisoners' identities, various reports alleging the Israeli as a 25-year-old, formerly ultra-Orthodox resident of Modi'in Illit, who supposedly crossed into Syrian territory by mistake before her arrest. The Syrian prisoners, meantime, include Nihal al-Makht and Diab Kamuz, both of whom come from families that oppose Israeli rule over the Golan. Israel captured the Golan in the Six-Day War of 1967 and formally annexed it in 1981. Many residents still consider themselves Syrian and retain Syrian citizenship. But Al-Makht was indicted for incitement in 2017, served 3 years in prison, and was released to house arrest. She will likely now be allowed to stay in the Israeli Golan in her home, a free woman. Kamuz, on the other hand, was sentenced to 16 years in prison in 2018 for plotting a bombing on behalf of Hezbollah, and Kamuz's father and 5 other accomplices were also arrested with links to the Iranian terror proxy. So it's not yet clear whether he'll be released to Syria or allowed to return to his village in the Golan.
Joining me now with more on the prisoner exchange between Israel and Syria, Dr. Nir Baum, research fellow at Tel Aviv University's Moshe Dayan Center. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Baum. Now, what's so important about Nihal al-Makht and Diab Kamuz?
Well, I'm not sure how important really all of this is. These are 2 prisoners. Diab is from Rajar, which is an interesting village, an actual Alawite village that is located in the Israeli-Lebanese border. He was convicted in 2016. Given information to Hezbollah. Nihal Makhat is the sister of Sadki Makhat. He was released in a prisoner swap last year. 3 years of arrest, incitement. These are not the most important prisoners, although they are somewhat significant. But I think what's significant here is not just a particular exchange of 2 prisoners in return to capture, which is not entirely clear why what the Israeli was doing in Syria, but a broader context of a Russian-Israeli Syrian move that may indicate other moves that may be actually more important. And I think that's maybe the important piece here.
So what other moves do you think might come next?
Look, we have heard reports about a mysterious meeting happened in Echmimim 2 months ago. We've heard that the Russians are digging again at the cemetery in Yarmouk. We've heard other conversations, significant ones between Israel and Russia on other issues that has to do with mainly Iran in Syria. So I would take this particular incident in the broader context. Israel and Russia are coordinating more. Russia has done other things in order to bring what it needs to bring to Syria, which is stability. Part of the stability needs to happen when the Iranians are pushed a little bit away. This is something that Israel was trying to push for quite some time. I'm not saying that this is really all happening all right through, but the Russians are making a number of moves in this direction. Israel certainly would like some of this to happen, and perhaps the fact that we're having some side issues that just happen to be timely and they are being dealt with may potentially assist with some other larger moves. The significance of these 2 prisoners, it's limited, and there are certainly more important issues on the agenda of Israel's engagement with the northern border with Syria and with Russia.
All right, Dr. Nir Baum, thank you again. I really appreciate your insights on all this.
You're welcome.
And moving on to the Gaza Strip, the Hamas terror group-run Islamic courts releasing a new edict for the enclave, ruling that from now on, all women will require permission from a male guardian to travel, be that from a husband, a brother, or a father. And the permission would further need to be registered with the Islamic courts in Gaza. But beyond the obvious issues in curtailing women's rights, Western media, like the Associated Press, the Washington Post, and the LA Times, are adding fuel to the fire, hinting that apparently the move is somehow Israel's fault. Joining me to explain is CEO of Honest Reporting, Daniel Pomerance. Daniel, thanks so much for being with us. Now, Honest Reporting was really first to call out the AP and the LA Times, Washington Post, et cetera, for printing the AP's allegations here. What is the reasoning for blaming Israel, and what do you take issue with?
Well, this is a really excellent article written by our editor, Giron Ben-Zvi, and reviewed by Charles Biebelzer, our managing editor, and it's available on our website. They did a great job of researching this. The Associated Press, and this got, of course, picked up by publications all over the world, like the Washington Post and the LA Times, they talked about this horrible law against women by Hamas's Islamic courts.
Right.
And then in the same sentence talked about the Israeli blockade as if it were somehow connected. And they do this on purpose. They're being tricky. There's actually a term for this in political science called transfer, when you associate two things by saying them in the same sentence, even though they're completely unrelated. AP did this on purpose because they want to say, well, technically we never said it was Israel's fault, so we didn't say anything wrong. But they talked about something that was entirely unrelated to the situation at hand.
Do you really believe that it's that insidious and pernicious? And could we give them the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe they were just ignorant and they put these two things together?
I don't think so, because there's a pattern. In 2012, Honest Reporting published an article called Israel Made Me Beat My Wife. And this was critiquing The Guardian in the UK, which had written a story saying that when Palestinian men sometimes beat their wives and children, it's actually Israel's fault. In 2016...
I remember reading that, actually.
You remember that one?
Yeah, it was because of Israel's occupation putting stress on Palestinian husbands, they go home and beat their wives.
Right, and then in 2016, the United Nations produced an entire study claiming to prove exactly that. And the people who suffer most from this are Palestinian women,
sure.
Much more so than Israel, because they don't get the attention and the help that they need. So we see this pattern occurring. Honest Reporting calls it out, and then the next pattern is that the journalists who do have an agenda try to get a little bit trickier by using transfer instead of making the claims outright.
So, in Honest Reporting's experience, because again, you guys do this basically all the time, that's your mission. So, what sources are really the best and the worst when it comes to getting things right in the Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, it's not so much a matter of source, but you should look to original source material. Even this article, for example, the AP piece, you can find elements in it and then track them down to the original source. For example, the Hamas charter in 1988, long before there was any kind of Israeli blockade. This is the charter that's famous for saying that Hamas's purpose for existence is to destroy Israel. But a less known phrase in that same charter is, and I quote, "Women are important because they manufacture men." You can also find by looking there that in Gaza, violence against women is legal. Sexual violence is legal. Rape is legal as long as it's within the family. Forced child marriages and honor killings are commonplace. None of this made it into the AP article, but the source materials, which is the Hamas charter itself, can be easily found and then connected to these events. So unfortunately, to get a really good look, you have to do a little bit of digging and legwork. But like I said, and this is the really horrible thing, there is no question, as the AP story does correctly state, that there is a terrible plight for Palestinian women in Gaza and also in the West Bank.
Yeah, that's not being challenged.
But it is, because when you allow political agenda to interfere with telling this story clearly and calling for the world to take action, the Palestinian women are the people who suffer the most.
All right, Daniel Pomerance, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, my pleasure.
All right, now while many Western media outlets are pushing the weight of the Middle Eastern conflict onto Israel's shoulders, the United Nations are also doing its part. Independent educational watchdog Impact SE reporting that UNRWA educational curriculum still frequently praises jihad and violence while referencing Israel as the enemy and erasing Israel from maps. And this despite UNRWA claiming to have dropped such materials last year. So here to discuss is CEO of Impact SE, Marcus Sheff. Marcus, thank you for being with us today. Now, walk me through the timeline to all the way to the present, because UNRWA, also known, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Palestinian Refugees, they claim to have gotten rid of this a long time ago, and they've long been accused of spreading this hateful material.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two things here, and they need to be separated. The first is that UNRWA has, for a long time, taught in its schools the Palestinian Authority curriculum. That is a curriculum which is radical, extremist. All peace teaching was removed from it. What is left there is encouraging young people to jihad, to martyrdom, to sacrifice themselves. And it's a curriculum which has been condemned by the United Nations, by the European Parliament, and other parliaments around the world. It is a very pernicious set of textbooks. But UNRWA have always said, well, listen, we have no choice. We have to teach the textbooks of the place where our schools are. But, and this is the new part, UNRWA wrote its own school materials in 2020. And we reviewed these sets of materials. And again, the first time that UNRWA had produced its own materials, one would expect a UN organization would seize that opportunity to teach children under its care peace and tolerance. But these were just as bad as those of the Palestinian Authority. They violate UN values, they violate UNESCO standards, and actually UNRWA's own stated principles, promoting hate teaching, incitement to violence, glorification of jihad, martyrdom, terrorism. Just to give you one or two examples, students are called upon to defend the motherland with blood. They are directed to passages that glorify terrorists, such as Islam al-Grabi, especially young girls. Israel is a member state of the United Nations, but UNRWA, a United Nations organization, essentially erases Israel off maps, calls Israel the enemy. There are dangerous libels, conspiracy theories such as Zionists intentionally setting fire to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that Israel deliberately dumps radioactive and toxic waste in Palestinian lands. So, a terrible set of teaching materials. Well, UNRWA admitted it, essentially.
Well, so that's what I want to get at, because you're saying that, in November of 2020, UNRWA says, we've listened to Impact SE, we've taken their criticisms into account, and we have dropped this material. And then, obviously, now we're seeing that that's not the case. So what does Impact SE do to really push the fact that this is not okay? Is there anything that really can be done?
Well, yeah, I think there is. UNRWA's response was damage limitation, a series of tweets by the UNRWA Commissioner General the day after our report came out, acknowledging inappropriate material. UNRWA itself put out official statements, essentially saying that this had been done, but what they tried to do was draw the line, say we have dealt with this, we actually knew about this. They don't say when. And everything is okay. And this actually was repeated by leaders around the world, by the British Minister for the Middle East, by German government. The fact is, it's not okay. This material is still being taught, as the report that we put out yesterday shows. So, I think what is clear here is that governments have to stop taking UNRWA's sound bites, frankly, at face value. And they need to start asking some really hard questions, some questions which really are an issue of due diligence. If they are funneling hundreds of millions of dollars to UNRWA, they're entitled to ask, how did this material get written? When exactly did you find this material? What exactly did you do to replace it with? What did you replace it with? These are questions which governments need answers to before they start writing these blank checks.
All right. Marcus Sheff, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
In other news, the Israel Health Ministry is drafting legislation that would compel workers in, quote, essential professions to get vaccinated against coronavirus or provide negative COVID tests before entering certain premises. And the bill primarily is targeting educators, police officers, and medical personnel. But already, government officials are running into many logistical and legal obstacles. In fact, Health Minister Yuli Edelstein's first proposed such legislation back in November 2020, but was blocked due to legal difficulties. Still, with nearly 52,800 Israelis actively infected, 928 of whom are in serious condition, health authorities are largely ignoring concerns that the draft law might violate civil rights, while insisting that the legislation is actually needed to protect public health. And this in addition to the Green Passport program, by which vaccinated Israelis will have more access to public amenities than the unvaccinated, which brings us now to the next issue, a black market for counterfeit vaccination certificates that's already large and growing larger, with cybersecurity experts claiming that the digital passes are all too easy to replicate. And that, just on Telegram alone, over 100,000 users have already joined groups that offer forgeries. Moving on, snowfall in Jerusalem for the first time in years, and it's quite a sight to see. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu even getting in on the fun, of course, seen on social media throwing his first seasonal snowball. All right, well, joining us to talk more about the exciting blanket outside is Jerusalem resident Danielle Moses. Danielle, thank you so much for being with us. Now, first of all, where did you make Aliyah from?
I made Aliyah from New York about 5 years ago.
And when did you move to Jerusalem?
5 years ago.
All right, so Okay, so how long has it been since you last saw snow?
And it's been about 5 years.
All right. So you moved to Jerusalem, you come from New York, and you just have not seen, like most Israelis, I think it's been hot and hotter for most seasons. So what is it like right now in Jerusalem? Is it exciting? What's going on?
No, it's really great. Coming from New York, there's a lot of things that you're used to, and one of them is snowfall every winter. And there's a part of you, like your childhood, that you really miss, having that snow day, playing with snow. And I sort of think of it the same way as like seasonal fruits, like in New York, you could get strawberries or blueberries all year long. But in Israel, you get them once a season, and it's something very special, and you look forward to it. And, now with the snow, I was used to it in New York. I had it every single winter, but now it's really something special that I look forward to when it comes to Jerusalem.
So are you seeing, parties, or what's the general kind of feeling when people are going outside? Is it kind of an annoyance to the majority of Jerusalemites, or is everybody pretty much getting in on the fun?
I think everyone is so excited about it. I went out last night at 10 p.m. with my dog for a nice walk in the park behind our building, and there were young kids outside having snowball fights, older Israelis building snowmen, and everyone's just excited by it because it's something really special that doesn't happen often.
So what about, infrastructure in general? Because I understand that in general, Jerusalem and really most of Israel is not really built for the cold weather. Is it hard to get out of the cold?
It's definitely not easy. There was not snowplows, but tractors just, driving down the street. I guess they were trying to use them as snowplows, but it didn't work so well. But we're moving forward, and a lot of the rain has melted the snow at this point. And I think that the snowfall has unfortunately ended. But we'll see. I didn't believe it was going to happen until it started happening.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I know space heaters are probably all the rage right now, making sure, of course, to bundle up as well. We've already, unfortunately, seen reports of one man even dying from hypothermia overnight in Kiryat Gat, and schools closing, traffic systems being heavily affected. Are you seeing anything like that?
So my daughter's school was open today, but everything started later at about 9 p.m. And there's definitely a question of if you should be on the roads at all. Our family has not gotten in a car today. We don't want to be driving on the roads today.
Are there like salt trucks and things, or is that really the sort of infrastructure you expect in America?
I don't think there are any salt trucks at all. Definitely something that I left in America. But so people who are commuting into Jerusalem, I recommend not if you can. And I would definitely recommend to stay off the roads in general.
All right, Danielle, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the weekend weather forecast with ILTV's Chana Rifkin.
Hi, Erin. So tonight you can expect partly cloudy skies with lows to sit at 47 degrees Fahrenheit or about 9 degrees Celsius. Then moving on into the weekend, Friday's calling for a rainy day throughout most of the country, with highs averaging 58 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. And then finally Saturday, we're going to see a bit of a clear up, but still cloudy with highs rising to about 62 degrees Fahrenheit or 17 degrees Celsius.
Thank you so much, Chana. And now, of course, let's take a look before we go of what's going viral in Israel. Wow. I guess maybe not everyone's quite enjoying the winter weather than as much as maybe suffering through it. Oh, wow. That is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.57 shekels to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then don't forget to visit the all-new and improved ILTV website at iltv.tv and subscribe to our newsletter for the latest updates while you're there. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.